Chapter 3. Mac glared at her. That's not funny. Doreen slapped her hands over her mouth to hold back the giggles and stared at Mac. Then tell me it's not human. The glum look on his face said it all. I can't say that. She peered closer. That could be a raccoon bone. It could be a bone from a squirrel. There's no way we can say it's human right now. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small bag, and stuffed the bone in there. There is one way. I'll take it to the lab. But they'll need a few days. Good, she said shortly. I need more than a week between bodies, please. At that, he gave her a sideways look and grinned. The grin quickly turned into an infectious laugh. She stared at him, feeling her own sense of humor returning. The only funny thing I see about this is the fact that, this time, it's your mother's property. Instantly, his laughter cut off. He glared at her. That's not funny. She smiled sweetly. No, but it's true. She stood, glanced around. And your mom has a lovely garden back here. If there are bones in the begonias, well, maybe it's not her fault either. She glanced at him. How long has she lived here? He frowned. I was born and raised here. And she was here probably soon after she married my father. He turned his gaze to the house. I don't exactly know how many years ago though. 50-ish. Might be time to find out. Ignoring him, she walked the length of the begonia bed, then surveyed the whole backyard garden. Everything is healthy but the begonias. So we can transplant them to another location, turn this particular plot of soil over, enrich it with some peat moss, fertilizer, and some perlite, maybe new soil depending on the last time your mother boosted this area. Then plant a different perennial there. Willing to change the subject, he turned to the rest of the garden. Where would you put the begonias? Begonias love sun. She turned in a slow circle, studying the garden that ran the perimeter of the backyard. There's a lot of sun on that back fence over there. She walked closer and studied the big daisy bushes in the spot she had in mind. Daisies will grow in poorer conditions. We could do a switch. Move the daisies to where the begonias are. She contemplated the idea as she glanced around at a few other bushes. You've also got a big spot here. She walked to a patch of bare garden beside some azaleas and what looked like a big rhododendron. You can always split up the daisies and pop one in here and scatter them around the yard. They throw a nice touch of white color throughout the summer. I'll talk to my mother about that. Doreen nodded. You do that. In the meantime, when you decide what you want to do, you can give me a call. We'll walk home, except I guess Goliath will do what he wants to do. She gave Mac a cheerful finger wave and headed out the backyard gate. Come on, Muggs and Thaddeus. We've done enough damage here. Thaddeus walked toward her, calling out, Damn bone. Damn bone. She sighed. That's not quite what we said, Thaddeus. Thaddeus tilted his head to the side as he started forward. She held the gate open for him, and before he passed through, a golden streak raced through the opening. It almost sent poor Thaddeus tumbling. Goliath, remember your manners. Goliath stopped, turned, gave Doreen a malevolent look, and slowly loped forward. She bent and caught Thaddeus. How about a ride, big guy? She popped Thaddeus on her shoulder. He leaned forward and stroked his head along her cheek. Thank you. Thank you. She laughed. That was appropriate. Who taught you to talk anyway? Miss Nan. Miss Nan. Instantly, Doreen felt homesick. Well, we can go the long way home and stop to visit her if you want. Or maybe go to town after a cup of tea. With a nod of Thaddeus's head at her second suggestion, she opted for heading home. As she carried on past the fence, she cast a glance behind her to see Max standing in his mother's backyard, his hands on his hips as he watched her with her trio maneuver toward the creek path. She waved again. He waved back, but she caught the odd look on his face. Whether it was because he heard her talking to the bird, or because of the begonias and whatever they'd found, she didn't know. Surely by now he'd be used to her though, so she voted for the bone she found in the begonia bed, being what upset him. It would certainly keep her attention for a while. Maybe longer than a while, actually. As she made her way to her backyard to walk around the partially dismantled fence, her animals dispersed, and she stopped and stared. We've made a bigger mess than ever. What are we going to do about that? Hey, a bright cheery voice called from the side of her house. Doreen turned to frown at the stranger coming toward her. May I help you? She asked politely. She was almost more determined to get a new fence up across the front, including the driveway, than she was worried about taking this one apart. Since the media had found out about the murder cases, they'd been all over her property. The woman extended a hand, but she was a little too perfectly coiffed to make Doreen happy. She'd seen women like her a lot over the years. This one had entered her backyard without an invitation, making her someone Doreen really didn't want to talk to. Yet manners always came to the forefront. Her soon-to-be ex-husband had drilled that into her all the time. It didn't matter if she liked somebody or not. Smile and use those manners to your advantage. She plastered her bright society smile on her face and shook the woman's hand. My name is Sybil. I'm here from the Kelowna newspaper. You've been giving all kinds of interviews to the big television and newspaper reporters, but you haven't done an exclusive for us yet. Doreen bared her teeth. And I won't either. And now that you've identified who you are, you can please remove yourself from my property. The smile fell from the woman's face. Oh dear. I didn't mean to upset you. There's a reason why I've been avoiding the crowd in the front. It's called I don't want to talk to anybody anymore about this. Doreen crossed her arms over her chest and tapped her fingers on her arm. So please turn around and leave. Well, maybe I'll just ask you about the fact that our lovely police detective, Mac Moreau, is over here a lot still. The woman's tone turned insinuating and slimy. Doreen tilted her head and pulled out her phone. And he'll be here in 2 seconds flat to arrest you for trespassing. The woman took a mock step back and raised her hands. Oh dear. Aren't you feisty? The thing was, Doreen wasn't kidding. As much as she wanted to fit into the community, and to make this place her home, the last thing she wanted was to be hounded by reporters. She lifted the phone to her ear and said, Mac, I've got a lady here. She repeated the woman's name and the newspaper she mentioned she worked for. She's making insinuations about your visits to my place and won't leave my property. Please come and remove her. Muggs walked closer to the reporter and sniffed her shoe. The woman jumped away and just missed Muggs lifting his leg where she'd been standing. No, no, no. Don't tell him that. Doreen snorted as she stared at Sybil. Why the hell wouldn't I? And there she'd done it again. She'd only ever sworn since moving here. Not good. Yet another part of her loved it. The freedom to swear and to not have anybody chastise her publicly for it? Priceless. Well, I didn't mean to upset you, the woman said as she backed up hurriedly. Really? Doreen said. I got the impression that not only did you try to insinuate yourself into my life and to pry information from me, but you also were slurring Mac's character, not to mention mine. And that's called slander. At that, she laughed inside. She'd heard her almost ex-husband say something almost identical to that at a party one time. She never thought that one of his party tidbits would be useful, but apparently this one was. The woman quickly retreated, waved at her gently, and said, How about I come back another day when you're feeling better? How about another decade when I no longer live here? And I'm feeling just fine, thanks, Doreen snapped. The woman turned and dashed around to the front of the house, almost tripping as Goliath dashed in front of her path. Had he done that on purpose? I hope so. At that point, she heard Mac's voice in her ear. Wow, I don't think I've ever heard you act like that before. And, to her mortification, she actually had dialed Mac. She just dialed half the digits, or so she thought. Instead, she had completed the call, and Mac had been listening in on her conversation as she had yelled at the reporter. Mac, I don't know what's happening to me, she said, bewilderment in her voice. This has been such a circus. His voice softened. Take it easy. You have good reason to be irate. Let me know if she comes back, and I'll have a talk with her. Well, if she comes back, I'm likely to set one of the animals on her. Muggs didn't like her. But I don't think she even noticed when he deliberately lifted his leg. He didn't pee on her, did he? Mac's voice was raised in a fascinated horror. No, more's the pity. She shook her head. The woman moved because of what I said. She doesn't realize how lucky she truly is. Mac laughed. You and those animals. Are you okay now? I was okay before. I didn't mean to dial your number. I was using the phone more as a prop to get her to behave. But I accidentally completed the call. I'm sorry you had to hear that. I'm really not as incapable of taking care of myself as I might seem. You're doing very well. Have a little self-confidence and trust in some of us, and you'll be fine. And just like that, he hung up the phone. She smiled and straightened her shoulders. Mac was right. She was doing much better. Hell, she'd helped him solve several murder cases. And that was huge. Maybe if she could do it again, she'd get some respect from people around here, and not just a macabre fascination. It pissed her off that the woman had been so bold and nervy as to come into Doreen's backyard. Doreen wondered what her rights were as a homeowner. She wandered around to the side of the house and stared out toward the front yard. The woman was there with her cameraman. And they were taking pictures of the front of her house. She understood from Mac that she could not do a whole lot about that. But damned if she would let them on her property. She walked into the kitchen, locating a large piece of corrugated cardboard by the laundry. She picked it up, grabbed a permanent marker, and wrote "No trespassing" on the front, and then on the bottom she wrote "Trespassers will be prosecuted." Walking back outside, she then grabbed one of the fence posts Mac had pulled out. An I-beam, he had called it. She walked to the garden right at the front of the property, ignoring the cameras that clicked and whirled in her face. Several people called out to her. She ignored them all. Thaddeus joined her as she punched the cardboard through the post twice so the sign would stay up, then pushed the vertical metal post into the edge of the soft garden bed. Then she twisted it so people could see her sign. Without saying another word, she turned and walked to her front porch. The people standing there gasped and said, "Well, I never." She stiffened her back and kept on marching. Thaddeus flew ahead to meet her at the door. Muggs wasn't with her, he'd stayed in the garage. Smart dog. He didn't like the nosy crowds any more than she did. Of Goliath, there was no sign. She walked up to the front door and said, "Good riddance." As she stepped inside, Thaddeus turned and called out to the crowd, "Good riddance. Good riddance." She gasped, ran inside with Thaddeus at her heels, and slammed the front door shut.